So I'm Mr. Dickinson for that, sorry.
So thank you very much for being here. Thank you to people who are watching at home. We're here to talk about, the session is called The Future of the Live Comedy Association. It's part of a series of discussions, panel discussions, debates, if you like, that we do during Leicester Comedy Festival called Beyond a Joke, and throughout the next, not quite 19 days, 17 days, 16 days, can't work it out. There are a number of different discussions that we are hosting as part of the 30th anniversary of the festival. So my name is Jeff Rowe, I'm the founder of the festival, and if we just start off, maybe starting this way and moving down the panel, if you could just say who you are and where you're from so people have some idea who we are.
Hi, hello, I'm Lindsay. Not sure where should we look? At each other or the camera?
Each other.
Okay, I'm Lindsay. I'm the Deputy Chief Exec of the Edinburgh Festival Fringe Society.
Hi, my name's David Elphick. I have my own comedy brand, Dave's Comedy, and I have some involvement with the Leicester Comedy Festival as a consultant, and I was part of the original steering group for the LCA back at the COVID years.
I'm Jessica Toomey from the Bucket Comedy Club in Manchester and the Women in Comedy Festival, and also an original member of the LCA.
I'm Adam Rushton, I run a Rushton Laughter Comedy Management. I was one of the founding members of the LCA, and I was the King of the North, Comedy Northern representative.
And I'm Pat Slowey. I am outgoing chair of the Live Comedy Association, which I'm sure we'll get to in a minute. And yeah, we've been on since the UK.
Okay, cool. So I just thought I'd start off with a bit of an introduction. I know most people on the panel will know a lot of this, but the Live Comedy Association, the LCA, was set up in May 2020, if I've got my dates correct, as quote-unquote an immediate response to the COVID pandemic in the UK. It's fair to say, I think, that it very quickly attracted lots of support from lots of different areas of the live comedy sector, and I think it's probably important to say that this conversation is, of course, because it's the Live Comedy Association, it's focusing on live comedy rather than TV or film or other elements. This is absolutely about live performance, and it was set up with a group of volunteer directors and board members, and myself and some of the panel were part of that original group of people who set it up. Adam and I think, stood down about 18 months ago, but David and Jess are still on the board, and we might come back to that in a minute. And back to yours, at the moment, still the chat.
Yes.
I think the LCA achieved some quick wins, really. It helped with negotiations around and with DCMS and the Arts Council with their emergency CRF funding for comedy, specifically for comedy organisations. The LCA launched the Save Live Comedy campaign. It administered a funding programme with Next Up, the streaming service to support comedians and people who work in live comedy. And PAX last year was secured a place on the board of the Edinburgh Fringe Society as the chair of the LCA following elections that year. And according to the LCA website, it exists to represent and connect the UK live comedy industry to ensure we survive and thrive in the face of COVID-19 and beyond. The organisation, we'll come back to some of these things in a minute, I suppose, but it's probably fair to say at the beginning that the organisation has been in a bit of a state of flux over the last year or so. I checked this morning, the LCA hasn't tweeted since July the 14th of last year. And the website is still active, it still has a membership, but there hasn't been very much activity over the last 12 months or so. The LCA wants to be a networking organisation, a lobbying organisation, and to represent all those who work in live comedy. And I think we wanted to have this conversation now that hopefully COVID is way behind us and everybody can kind of move on. At Leicester Comedy Festival, we thought it was important to have conversation to look at the LCA, to explore what the future might look like. So I guess, Pax, maybe starting with you, can you just tell us a bit from your perspective, because you were a member of the LCA before you became the chair, can you just tell us a bit about your involvement and why you got involved in the LCA to start off with, I suppose?
Yeah, I think it all started, as we all remember, from those sort of panicked Zoom calls as COVID sort of hit and lockdowns hit, and really, you know, our sector was hanging on a thread. And so, yeah, I think just off those calls, so many of us were just like, we have to do something about this, get stuck in. And I think that really shaped what the organisation was and has led to some of the, I mean, I'm probably getting slightly ahead of the questions here, but I think it really shaped the structure of the organisation, was set up to respond to crises, like initially COVID, but then, you know, whenever there was something else, whether that was Omicron, when that was shutting venues again after they'd reopened, or whether that was things like the Fringe app, those moments were when the LCA and I guess the people at the top of it were able to make things happen and make change happen. But I think, yeah, there's been challenges adapting to a broader sort of operational model and strategy. Yeah.
Sure. Adam, slightly different question, but you can also answer the same question as Pax did. Was it the first time that you were actively engaged in a live comedy membership lobbying organisation? Because one of the things we'll touch on in a bit is how the sector responded to the idea of having a membership organisation. Because as far as I know, it was the first one, but was it the first time that you'd kind of come together with a load of like-minded people working in live comedy?
Yeah, it was. The response was mixed, as we all know. We had a lot of negativity as well. I got into a lot of arguments with people. Just need to leave it alone, don't I? we had a mixed response, and it's always baffled me. We're the only industry I've ever been in that has no protection, zero protection for anyone. It baffles me. You know, there's nothing. If I get in trouble, who do I go to? Who do I turn to? I think it meant the LCA came. There's been previous people tried before, but I think the LCA was the first time that you sort of went, no, this is right, people are involved, something's got to happen, and then the support that we got was kind of won a lot of people over. And I think it's something that this industry massively, massively needs, and it really needs it, because like I talked to Lindsay before, like with the cost of all the accommodation going up in Edinburgh and all that, it's great that they're fighting that battle, but they also need support of other sectors, and I think we're the only ones who don't really have anything. Does that make? Have I answered your question there?
Yeah.
I feel like I just started rambling then.
Can you just? I mean, I don't want us to reveal anything that we don't feel comfortable about revealing. But you mentioned then that there was some negativity. There was some.
Leo, sorry.
Can you just talk a little bit about
sorry,
that?
I say that a lot. Can I talk about that? Well, there's a few people who said, "Is this a family show?"
Yes.
We all know who we were, and Leo, if you're watching, hello. The problem we've got in our industry, and me and Lindsay again were talking about this downstairs, the problem we've got is it's a very self-preservation mentality in this industry. It's a very, because you're on your own, you're in charge of your career and all that, it's very much, and it's not through nastiness or anything like that, but it's very much, I've got to protect I've got to protect what I've got, and I've got to protect it. Because this has been tried so many times and never been successful, a lot of people are sceptical about it. And a lot of people are like, well, who are you to speak on behalf of me and all that? We also have a section of the circuit who, unfortunately, are mainly straight white men who moan that you can't talk about anything on stage anymore. because PC's gone mad, who think that anyone who's trying to do anything is the enemy. And we got a lot of that flack, and as we know, Simon Fairhouse came in for a lot of it, to the point where she was actually targeted online and bullied, and I think she had threats of people assaulting her and all sorts sent to her. Thankfully that was a minority, but yeah, I got a few backlash. I ended up sacking a client because of it, because he said people like us should go out of business because we're a scum. Come here. No, okay. And yeah, it was quite baffling in a way, because at the end of the day we were all doing it for free, and we were battling to help you and keep you putting food on your table. And yeah, it is. Yeah, we had quite a lot of conversations about Leo, but it's weird, wasn't it? I just didn't get it. The backlash that we got, I didn't get it. I didn't understand it.
No,
This is a
everybody
good thing.
feels
This
it.
is
It's fair to say. Jess, from your point of view, you run the main part of your business, I guess, for years. It's been the Frog and Bucket and it's been a venue. You've presumably been part through the venue of other networks and other membership organisations. So forget live comedy, but venue in Manchester, there must be a venues group of people.
There's a cultural leaders group, so all the museums, art galleries, theatres, we all meet once a month.
Yeah.
And I think again that was born out of COVID.
Yeah.
Got quite a lot. Pub and club network as well, or the licensed venues.
Yeah.
I think did a bit of work with equity. I think there's something to represent every sector apart from live comedy before the LCA came along.
And so you heard about the LCA, the idea of an LCA, and presumably you thought, brilliant, at last. At the moment, right now, at the beginning of COVID, there's somewhere for me to go and other people to talk to, but possibly longer term, this is needed, the idea of a membership organisation, because it was pretty new, I think.
Gosh, what are we now, 2 years, 3 years?
Mm-hmm.
From now, coming up to 3 years. I think we forget how bad it was.
Yeah.
And it was a real case of fight or flight. So it was a saviour. It was when you were. I wasn't even in the office. I was at home. When you feel so helpless and everything felt so out of control, the LCA felt like finally an opportunity of having some control or taking control of the situation and trying to do something positive, rather than just crying into my pillow at home.
When you think of it, Jess, in the space of, I remember in the space of about 2 days, our entire industry
Yeah.
gone.
Yeah.
And against the law.
Just gone, yeah.
Yeah.
2 days, it was just,
Yeah.
it was unbelievable.
And David, from your point of view, presumably because your background is largely in venues.
Venues and promoting.
And promoting. Similar kind of situation. You were like, great, there's something. Maybe you heard some negative stuff like Adam's mentioned, but presumably you were like, this is something that's needed in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was definitely a challenge at first because the industry has never had an organisation like the LCA. So I think Adam's right that there was a huge part of the live comedy industry who just didn't know how to behave with the LCA existing and had to sort of...
I'm just going to chip in though to say we did keep reminding ourselves at the time the negative voices were the loudest ones and they were the minority. They were the minority voice. We had to keep reminding ourselves that there was a huge amount of people in support of it.
I mean, my biggest sort of thing which got me excited about the LCA outside of COVID in the future was, I mean, predominantly my sort of latter experience has been on promoting, but as promoters within live comedy, we never spoke. The promoter who, I don't know, Spikey Mike at Funhouse Comedy, I'd never spoke to Spikey in 5 years. now we have this organisation, and I mean, I'd set up my little promoters group, and we started talking, and that to me was just a massive plus. Because like now, I mean, I now have that network of other promoters to talk to, and I can say, I mean, there's a good example. Recently, I had a show booked at a venue in Lincoln, but I spoke to a fellow promoter who runs another venue in Lincoln, and we had a good chat about these are the dates I'm going to do, and we agreed that we weren't to clash on dates, and that he could promote his shows and my shows, and I would do the same at his. And that to me was one of the huge pluses of the LCA, that it brings the community together.
Yeah.
Because it's probably maybe useful for people to know, or to be reminded, I guess, the live comedy industry, or sector, as it might be called, is largely an awful lot of individuals who do what they do. Even at quite a big level, it's still a lot of fragmented individuals who just do what they do. There isn't, quite often describe it as a cottage industry, which is not meant as a disrespectful way of talking about it, but it's people, just you said about crying into a pillow, you know, at the beginning of the pandemic, I worked in my spare room at home, which got turned into an office, and was trying to keep Leicester Comedy Festival going. You know, there were other people obviously employed by the festival, but it's individuals, right? It's not some big corporations that run Just a Tonic or any of these other brands, you know, Frog and Bucket or whatever. It's just a bunch of people. And so, Lindsay, either with your Fringe Society hat on or not, as the case may be, what I'm interested from your point of view is, when were you first aware that there was a thing called the LCA? And because presumably, for a long time, you worked with other membership organisations for other sectors, dance, music, theatre, perhaps, but comedy there wasn't anything. So I'm interested just to hear about, when did you start to hear about this thing called the LCA?
Yeah, the COVID memory is hazy, and yeah, so timelines are sketchy, but we were aware that it existed, and just assumed it was doing what you were describing, which is recognising that as a sector we rely on a collective effort and a collective investment, despite being individuals, organisations within that. And you know, lots of people were coalescing in similar ways during during COVID. And then, you know, we work with unions, we work, you know, your Equity, your BEC2, Leicester with Unite, they hate us. And then, you know, representative groups of people who have shared interests, and then some with strategic partners, people like Pippa and Birds of Paradise. Oh, so Pippa is Parents in the Performing Arts, so they support you know, people who have families to actually continue having a career. So they generally tended, historically pre-COVID, they generally tended to be strategic groups of people who were trying to help us break down a barrier to participation at the Fringe. And there's a whole range of barriers. You know, we are very acutely aware of the massive challenges just pre-COVID that there were with the Fringe. And then obviously the LCA came into very sharp focus with the app and the letter. And actually, when you you dwell on these things retrospectively, the failure on our part was to not acknowledge that the LCA existed. You know, at the time we were like, oh, you could have phoned us rather than just sending us an open letter. Well, we could have phoned you, right? We could have reached out. And everybody was doing everything at the same time in their bedrooms, crying in their pillows, doing everything that they could to survive. So I think retrospectively, remembering that we're just people, right? We're all just people doing our jobs. So we were actually, in hindsight, I think quite impressed with the collection of voices and the range. You know, you've got sort of well-known TV comedians and somebody whose entire career is in the circuit, in the fringes of the sector. So, but then it has all gone very quiet since. So the real sort of the thing that gives me good hope, is that, you know, you're keeping going, but also that if there's organisations that can get all those individuals to coalesce around a collective action for the collective good, then, you know, with a festival as large as ours, we can't possibly interact with individuals. So it's quite exciting to see what your new future plans are and how we can work together. and prevent you having to sort of, you know, write an angry letter signed by, you know, 7,000 people and be, oh, because that's not, none of us want to work that way, right? We don't want to be antagonistic or unless we have to be. And sometimes you do have to, you know, bang on the door and be like, this is not good enough, and the French society welcome and accept that. But so that's a long-winded answer to when they wrote us a very angry letter.
then you went, oh,
Yeah, yeah, okay.
I mentioned earlier on that it's always been a voluntary-led thing. Do you know, Pat, how roughly, because I think you said 7,000 people signed the letter, I think it was 1,700.
It's probably exaggerating.
How many members would the LCA have?
It's around 2,000.
2,000?
Yes,
Okay.
but like things like Fringe Society Open Letter have obviously gone wider.
Yes.
Save Live Comedy went very wide. That was to
That's amazing.
That was a
It's
great
like-
campaign.
38,000 people, I think, in 48 hours.
Yeah.
So, and we do still have that data for specific use. You know, those comedy fans.
Selling it on.
For selling it on. Yeah.
So
That's
marketing.
But the core was looking at about 2,000 people, which is pretty significant
Pretty
in terms
good.
of people who identify as working within live comedy. That's a significant bunch.
Who are they? Are they comedians? Are they producers? Are they promoters? Is it a whole range?
Everyone, yeah. I think that, you know, just because of the kind of how the industry breaks down, there are more comedians within that than anything else.
There's some
Yeah.
punters as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, see, I think, for like, you look at the forums like the Comedy Collective, for instance, you've got 10,000 people on that, and it's now trying to think with the comedy, because I knew about equity as soon as I became a comedian, as soon as, well, I say, I used to become a comedian when I was doing open mic nights. You knew of equity, and it's trying to, I think, with something like the LCA, that's the biggest barrier I think it's always faced, is getting it to that level of where as soon as you start comedy, you know what the LCA is, and you know that something you should be involved in, and you should be doing that.
Yeah, sure.
Because it's something, that's how you, I think, change it and make it become an organisation where it is integral to this industry, because you know if you go there, you're going to get the support, you're going to get whatever you need. That's why everyone goes sign up with equity. Well, if the promoter screws you over, you can go to equity, but don't really make us send a letter.
Yeah.
And they panic and then pay you straight away. It's, I've threatened people with equity, I'm not even in equity. Equity's watching that really sorry. But
Sure.
So can I say, as a punter, looking at it from the auditorium side, the other side of the mic,
yeah,
when I first heard about the LCA, I thought it was going to be very similar to the Society of London Theatres, who get together and issue a press release about theatre in general, rather than the specifics, because they've all got their own individual marketing people.
Yeah.
But the LCA is its promoters, its clubs, its venues, its comedians, it's loads of different people. Is that one of the challenges for the future? The fact that...
Well, my next question.
I think you want to swap?
Are you reading? You're reading my notes. I'm going to hide them from you. So my next question, and David, could we start with you? Is I'd like to just, we've talked a little bit today, we've mentioned a little bit today about the fact that there's not been very much action or activity from the LCA since July of last year when the letter was sent, all that kind of stuff. Before we look at going forwards, could I just start with you, David, in terms of what have been, and you can be as honest as you like,
I will.
what have been the problems, the challenges in modern terminology of the LCA? Because Pax talked about, and Adam talked about, it started, there was all this enthusiasm, loads of people came. I mean, my God, some of those Zoom meetings we had, there was about 5,000 people on them. It was I'm exaggerating, but what, from your point of view, looking backwards, what have been the challenges, problems of the LCA so far?
I think going back, there was a vast amount of work, communication and effort put in by everybody involved in the steering group, and we got through that period of time, and we got towards the end of COVID, and there was and I'm not saying it's a fault, I'm just saying that's what happened. We got to that point and there was a collective or a selective sigh saying, we're through it, we don't need to do anything else. There's nothing more we need to do. We've got through COVID, we've got some funding from CRF, we can now all go off and make money and the world will be rosy again. And I certainly didn't share that view. I think the challenges which we're all facing now as an industry, they're mounting up, cost of living, utility bills, everything that venues and promoters throughout the industry are suffering. I just think there's so much more work to be done for the industry, and I think there's a need for the LCA, and it's got a lot more to do.
And was that, would you say that was largely because it was a voluntary-led organisation, and so the people running the LCA, you know, Pax is here as the chair, was it because Pax and other people leading the LCA were had to get work and were, you know, had other distractions?
There was definitely an element of that, and I think in hindsight, and whether this is anybody's fault or I don't want to portion blame anywhere, the LCA was too big. It had a massive board. I can't remember how many was on it at one point.
About 21.
Yeah. And just with the fact that we're all back at work, the time it took or to try and get any proportion of those 22 people on a meeting was just proving impossible. So I think that sort of just gradually grew worse and worse, and we were just not having meetings, there was nothing being done, we weren't announcing anything, we weren't tackling any of these issues which were coming up.
I think we all acknowledge it needed a paid member of staff.
Yeah.
Because as soon as all our businesses opened, we had to work hard to make sure they thrived, they bounced back, and we suddenly weren't all sat at home in our spare bedrooms all day. Easily able to coordinate these meetings, just we're all back to the grindstone and working hard. So to be fair to everyone, we didn't have the same amount of time to dedicate to it, and we all acknowledge for it to thrive going forward, we needed money to pay someone to do that necessary work, the admin side.
And Adam, from your point of view, you and I were on the board initially in the same position as Pax and Jason, David, and then we stepped back whenever it was, 18 months ago or whatever. Would you say the similar things to Jess and David have said in terms of?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm hesitating to say why did you stop, but
Why did I stop? I was king of the north, stepped down, allowed someone else to do that.
Still king of the north.
I'm still king of the north. Yeah. And then I became the agent rep, and like trying to organise people in this industry is hard enough anyway. So it was just like I didn't have. When everything started up again as well, I had to keep my business afloat. I had to get my business back up and run into the standard quickly as I could. And I thought I wouldn't be able to give the time I could. It deserved to roll. So that's why I stepped aside to give someone else someone who could do a better job than me, basically.
you talked earlier on about grief you got and the LCA got in terms of it never worked and all that kind of stuff. Did that I think I described them earlier on as quick wins, but after the CRF funding, after the Save Live Comedy campaign, which Pax said was enormously successful, you said the same. Did those negative voices go away?
I won't know, he blocked me. You know, devastated about that. But yeah, he blocked me. Every now and again I get a tweet off one of them saying I don't book him anymore because I'm prejudiced and or something like that. I don't know, I don't really pay attention. I know Simon carried on getting abuse. I think she still gets a bit now. It got really, really bad. Because one of the people tweeted it. He's quite a right-leaning comic and has a lot of arsehole followers. Tweeted her details out to them, and she was getting a lot of abuse to the point where I think she deleted some of her social media. So I know it did carry on. But thing is, and I've been a comic, I've been a promoter, I've been an agent. Well, I am an agent. Some comedians' mentalities are they're always looking for someone to blame for why it's not going their way, and we'll never change that. So if it's not us, it's a Fringe Society, it's a Fringe show, think, oh well, or it's PR's evil, or this is evil, or that's evil, or that, and you're never going to please those people. Those people, instead of going, well, how do I make myself better, they're just too concentrated on blaming everyone else, but instead of looking at themselves. You know what I mean? It's just the nature of this industry, and you get bad sections of every industry and everything. But for me, like I was in the military, I came from the military where you all work together and you all, so I'm very much of that ethos of, well, like what we're doing up in the north, like Jess and I start an agency, and I'm helping Jess. Jess is going to be competition, but I'd rather Jess.
But they don't really know.
Particularly giving all the shit acts. But I'd rather Jess, I want Jess to be massive, because then if she's massive, it means more talent stays in the north, more talent stays around, it means more attention comes on her. And we should be working together, we shouldn't be working against each other. And like David said about setting up those groups, I set one up for the north as well. And even now seeing people go in, that's in my head what the LCA should, is about. It's about a network, a source of information, a source of going in and going, like being able to post it somewhere and go, oh wait, this has happened, is this okay? Has anyone gone through this? And people can go, I went through this, mate, and I'll tell you what, give us a phone call, and I love you. And it happens with promoters one all the time now. You see promoters going in going, oh, this was the venue, has anyone else ever had this before? And loads of promoters go, give us a ring, mate, I'll talk you through it. And you go, that's what we need, instead of going, this is mine, that's mine, you do one, and yeah, you work with him, I'm going to blacklist you, you work with him, or you. We should all be going with, at the moment, cost of living's coming up, we're fighting to lose the battle all the time now. TV, social media, everything, we're competing with, like I was saying to, again, Lindsay downstairs now, there's comedians out there who are becoming massive on social media, so we're looking at all of us going, why do I need you? Because I can go and do it myself. So instead of fighting, we should all be.
We had that
How do we save ourselves? How do we keep this?
We had that conversation ages ago at open mic nights that the vast majority are in the south. That there should be a programme of open mic sessions up in the north.
We don't need it in the north, maybe just.
Yeah,
We just got comedians. We don't need trying. We just bang great ones out.
I just want to hear from Pax about, because you're the chair of the LCA, you're in the thick of it. From your point of view, two questions I guess. One is, what were your, either personally or with your chair hat on, what were your challenges, maybe particularly over the last year? I said earlier on, the last tweet was in July or whatever, I guess because people might be watching and going, well, what's been going on? I'm interested in what's been your challenges, what's been, from your own point of view, hard in terms of trying to maintain this thing called the Live Comedy Association. We've heard that people hate it, people are really negative, some people are negative about it, the vast majority aren't. People, including I guess yourself, had to go off and earn money and all of that. Can you just talk to us a bit about your own challenges, and then also what's been happening since July 22?
Okay, so I broadly agree with everything that everyone said. It has been financial constraints. We need a paid staff member, and me and Reed and Owen did some work on fundraising for that, which sort of turned out to be a dead end. So then, it's just dependent on volunteer work as always, and as we have all been getting busier, as we've all been having to support our businesses to make sure they don't go out of business. It's just that people have limited energy, which is why, whenever there's been a crisis, we have managed to sort of corral everyone into, the open letter to the Free Society, or, those moments are the moments when the LCA has managed to still do stuff. But outside of that, it's a lot less easy to corral a group of very busy people onto a call to talk about like long-term strategy or, you know, boring fundraising questions. But it's just as essential. But you know, it is a challenge that we have all faced across the board. You know, I've faced it, Bleeding Erin have faced it. Every single board member has been busy, so you know, it has been hard outside of those times. On the negativity point as well, I think it's worth mentioning that some of those voices that were, you know, always posting those comments on Facebook posts or on tweets, some of those people, when we were, you know, making the second Save Life Comedy campaign live, which was the crowdfunder to issue grants, some of those people got in touch to ask for advice on applying for grants. So, you know, we did clearly win them over when it came to giving them money. So they did see the value there. So, you know, I think some of those voices did die down. Some of them didn't, and some of them did turn into harassment.
It's amazing how people change when there's money, isn't it?
I think there is something about when, you know, the Fringe Society is in a similar position where we don't actually, you know, we're not producing a thing. Our job is to help other people. When you're in that position, some of the job is just taking the flack and taking the anger, because when you try and stop just being angry and upset at people shouting at you for no reason, calling you things, it's like, I'm definitely not one of those. And then when you get past that and you think, well, actually, a lot of this just comes down to either personal or financial anxiety, right? Some people are just terrible people and we can put those over there. But in the main, the anger and the frustration, I think, is rooted in there being no feasible solution and no way for them to individually challenge what are pretty structured market forces that say, you know, drive the price down, competition, sell, and actually there's nowhere else for that anger to bubble up. So sometimes, you know, we accept there's a level of, part of Fringe Society's job is taking that shit, and actually part of the LCA's job is taking that shit and then sifting through it to understand what the actual challenges and issues are, and then having those conversations. So from our point of view, something like the LCA is really important, because not because we don't want people to shout at us, because that they're more than entitled to, and we would never close the door to that, but because actually what we need is the help to make sense of, in between all of the noise, what's the problem? Like some of this is symptom, and some of this is genuinely that there's plenty of problems with Fringe, and that's where I think it's going to be really valuable, because it is that mix of the people who are in the business of it, and then the individuals who are just, you know, trying to make their career work. And sometimes the elephant in the room is people are angry because they're just not actually very good. You know, that unspoken conversation with lots of people who are like, all these reasons, why am I showing? It's like, well, maybe you should. But that's actually the minority. I think most of the time when people are shouting at us, it's because they're operating in economic and personal circumstances that are just so bleak, and the world is just getting bleaker. And I think the only strategy going forward is to collectively fight up rather than individually fight sideways and down, because we're stronger together.
Yeah. Just to jump in what you're saying there, Lindsay, because I think I agree with that. For the LCA was always, we sort of encouraged constructive negative feedback.
Yeah.
But a large section of it from a certain group of individuals became personal and quite aggressive and quite violent.
Oh, I don't doubt.
Like, you know what I mean? And when you go like that, it's, at the end of the day, it's a comedy association. Why are you getting so angry about it? What is wrong with you? Why are you getting so angry?
Get one life on this green planet.
Is fighting on your behalf to get you money.
Yeah.
What is wrong with you if you're sat at home going, I hate this? Just like that. Fucking grow up.
And I just wanted to mention why I thought it would be good for Lindsay to be here for the Fringe Society. And the good news is that so far we haven't been dwelling just on Edinburgh. And that's great, because I thought this might just turn into Edinburgh kind of another conversation. We've got a conversation about Edinburgh in about an hour and a half, so we can have that conversation.
Yay!
Perhaps then. But I thought it was useful to have an outside perspective on the live comedy sector and the LCA. So that's kind of why it's great that you're here. But also, you mentioned earlier on about kind of other networks and other unions and people that you work with. From your experience at the Fringe Society, is what people are talking about today, is it just comedy that's kind kind of in this situation, or do you have any input in terms of, my perception is it's exactly the same with the MU, with the Music Venues Trust, with other sort of networking organisations, membership organisations. It's exactly the same. Is that, can you say anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, it would just be sort of personal observation,
Yeah.
but I think what makes the comedy sector slightly different to, you know, is that, and it's interesting that you've tried to find money and there isn't any. And I think it's interesting in the way that, you know, Arts Council England now fund comedy. Creative Scotland's still umming and ahhing the difference between a funny spoken word show and a comedian. Like this notion that comedy is entertainment but isn't art, which is just madness to me, because it's an absolute art form. And I think the challenge that, there's lots of organisations out there that are funded, and they're either union-based or they're people like, you know, the Federation of Scottish Theatre do incredible work on behalf of their member base. We're a member of that. That's, you know, for an organisation of our scale, that's like £400 a year. That's and it's much, much cheaper, I think, for individuals, but that's what you've never had as a sector, is a single point where there are funded organisations who are working on your behalf, that the artists and the individuals and the organisations can all come sort of together and figure out what their shared areas of work are, coalesce around individual items, say, well, I don't really care about that, it doesn't impact me, I'm just going to ignore it. That exists in almost every other performing art sector, because they're recognised by the national funders as arts and culture, rather than, I don't know how they define comedy. And I think that's the thing that has to change, because otherwise unless there's an investment in the infrastructure that's needed to even just manage and facilitate those conversations and capture that feedback, that isn't just you doing it on a Saturday morning in your spare time. That, I think, is the big difference, is that any of those other organisations we work for, unless they're very grassroots and very small, and it's you know, something like Fringe of Colour, which is a couple of people who just really, really want to make sure that the work by artists of colour at the Fringe is profiled. That's a sort of personal pet project type thing. All the rest of them, there are partially salaried or paid employees whose job it is to keep the momentum, to keep that going. So. And I was thinking about this on the train down here yesterday, that the big challenge, before I sort of had a sense of what you guys were doing, that if it relies on voluntary space and time, and that's really complicated when you've got day jobs, and then if you give it to an institution to babysit, then without fail, almost always institutionalise it, because they have to fit it into everything else. So how do you keep it vibrant enough and spiky enough and energetic enough for you to be able to say, as you say, this thing's a real problem, everybody now, versus here are some longer term problems, who wants to help fix these? That, you do that just for, you know, the fun of it, and there is an element of volunteering your time and contribute to the sector, but somebody has to, you know, make all the calls and plan all the meetings and arrange the teas and coffees and book the room and, you know, convince speakers to speak. That shouldn't be only because you've got the privilege of being in a salary position or having the time to do it. So that would be a big difference to me.
Yeah. And I mean, I have conversations with people and have done since whenever it was 3 years ago that the LCA was set up, with people who say, oh, it's completely unnecessary, so I just want to sort of move on to the future, I suppose. And again, I'll start here and go down the line, if that's all right. David, from your point of view, why, now COVID's out of the way, and arguably I would suggest the LCA wasn't only set up to deal with COVID, and I mentioned earlier on there are other aims and objectives of the LCA, but now COVID's out of the way, what's the point in the LCA? What does it need to do from your point of view?
The small question there, Jeff.
Yeah. Yeah. We've got 15 minutes.
Yeah. Well, I think the community aspect is what, to me personally, is critical. It's important because it created communication between all aspects of the live comedy industry, which had never existed before. So if that is the only reason it should continue, I think that's justification for it doing so. In terms of the future, I mean, we don't know what's going to happen. It's quite possible COVID will reappear in a couple of years.
Yeah,
Quite
we've got
possible.
war with Russia. We don't have to worry
Yeah.
about COVID.
We don't, I mean, obviously we're in the middle of the cost of living crisis. That's putting pressure on venues. Jess will back that up in terms of all the bills and stuff for operating it. But I just don't think, I mean, it's inherent with the industry we're in. It will never be rosy from now until the end of time. Something will happen, challenges will arise. And unless we have an organisation which represents the industry, we can't deal with those problems when they arise.
So broadly speaking, for you, it's partly about people who are working in the industry
Yeah.
having somewhere to go,
Yeah.
having a sense of community, having a sense of what
Yeah.
the sector is.
100%.
Jess, from your point of view, because obviously what you do, you mentioned earlier on, you're part of different networks and you've got a few of them and stuff. But why do you want the LCA to carry on? Why shouldn't it just go, okay, well, we were there for COVID, we had some quick wins, we did quite well, thanks very much, I'm going to focus on what I do in Manchester and the Northwest. For you personally, what's the point of the LCA?
We deserve one. It's a big sector. It generates a lot of money. I don't think until we did the surveys and we measured and quantify how important comedy is to the economy, that we deserve a voice. 1st of December 2019, we wouldn't have expected COVID. So it'd be naive now to think there's not something else around the corner we aren't expecting. Yeah, and I think so much work was put into forming the LCA. At a time when we had the time to do it, it'd be a waste for all that hard work just be thrown away, because once it's gone, it'll be very hard to convince the industry to support another
I
one.
don't think it would happen.
Yeah. And we worked hard to prove ourselves to them. It'd be 10 times more hard work to start all over again.
So yours, again, broadly speaking, David talked about
Community.
a voice for the community and for the sector. You've talked about the other way. You've talked about talking to other people and advocacy and lobbying and talking about how many jobs there are in the industry. That's what you're thinking. Adam, from your point of view, what would, because I'm assuming you're still a kind of notional member of the LCA, but what would be, why should it continue to exist?
We found out in a very, very scary way when COVID hit how fragile our industry is. Our industry is built on sand. It is. We are disposable. If you have cost of living crisis, you have anything that affects someone's income, then entertainment, hospitality is the first thing that they go, no, I'm going to stop that. I'm going to stop doing that. We don't have any, like we've already said, like all of us, we don't have anyone to speak for our industry as a collective. Comedians especially moan all the time about things. We're the first organisation, right, Ms. Ron-Paxson, the first organisation ever to get the DCMS to recognise comedy as an industry.
Yeah.
That's huge. We got the government to recognise us.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We didn't just do it, we got the government to go, alright, come on, tell to us, what do you need? And that, who else is going to do that? Jimmy Ten Gigs, who runs an open mic in Manchester. No, he's not, is he? You know what I mean? I'm sorry to say that, but all this, I'm not trying to sound cocky, but it's stupid, it's ridiculous. Why anyone would think our industry doesn't need something like this. Every industry has something like this. We need not a governing body, but we need a body that represents the industry. We need a body that regulates the industry. We need a body that helps, is a point of call for people in it. We've had so many things with the Me Too movement, with all this, which is still going on with, you know, trans comedians not being recognised, with racism, with all sorts going on in this industry. And where do you go? If you're someone who's been affected by that, where do you go? What do you do? you go on, put it on Facebook. If we've got a governing body that is there with people point and call where someone can go, someone can get advice, someone knows the procedures that you go through, you go and do this and all that, then it's stupid to let it die.
It's just a very, very quick random example. I've got sitting in my email inbox from the MVT, Music Venues Trust, saying, can we have a meeting? Because they've got all of these members with live music venues which are not being used 4 nights a week. But saying, can we have a meeting with somebody from the LCA to discuss how we could all work together? If you didn't have the LCA, you couldn't tackle that issue.
And so, Bax, I think, I can't remember now, yesterday or this morning or whatever, you said you were the outgoing chair of the LCA. From your point of view, what's the, I mean, aside from, I guess, you've put an awful lot of time and energy and work into it, so you don't want it to stop, I assume. Why is it important to you that there's a future for it?
I think the words that I've always used to sort of describe the purpose of the LCA are to champion the industry or the sector, to network, to connect it, and to better it. So, you know, we should be giving advice and guidance and supporting our members to improve the way they run things. We should be championing it both behind closed doors, you know, to government in those meetings with DCMS that we had weekly throughout the pandemic, but also publicly with big campaigns like Save Live Comedy, shouting about the importance of it. And then, connecting. There's been a lot of discussion of the community, the networking. That's just as big a win. All of the work that we've done there with those Facebook groups, with those channels of communication, because as has been discussed before, we never used to talk.
No.
We never used to talk to people who even like worked just down the road from us. And it was because there was this sort of mentality of we're all on our own doing this, we're all, and it's not necessarily that we saw those people as competitors, but they were just, yes, very separate from us. And we've helped break down those barriers and actually start talking to everyone.
Build an actual community.
Yeah. Well, it's an industry of so many different moving, like you said before, so many different moving parts in this industry. It's not like, you know, your teachers, you know, your teachers industry like that. We've got so many things from PR promoters to sound techs to everything right through to the actual performer who's on there. We've got so many moving parts to this, and like it's just it just baffles me. Like none of them, no one's got protection.
We should have somebody like your good self, because we talk to comedians, venues, technicians.
We should have an audience member.
We should have an audience.
Another board member.
We need to finish in a bit, but one of the things I just want to touch on before we do is we've talked before about the diverse nature of the industry. We talked about how many members there are of the LCA, and we've talked a little bit about how, for want of a better phrase, fragmented the live comedy sector is. And one of the things, I think perhaps you mentioned earlier about the Save Live Comedy campaign, is 35,000 or something you mentioned?
38.
38,000. That's unlike me to underestimate things. Normally I overestimate everything. But it's an awful lot of people, I think, in live comedy, and you just touched on this, David, in terms of the Music Venues Trust. They partly work in live comedy, but they also work in other things. They do other things, right? They multitask with different types of stuff. So going forwards, does the LCA, we've talked about scale and size, we've had similar conversations about Fringe in terms of scale and size. Is there a bit of the LCA that needs to actually shrink a bit and focus on not trying to engage with 25 board members or whatever you said, however many it was, thousands of people? Is there, again, David, I'll start with you, but is there, because it seems to me that might be really difficult to try and satisfy 38,000 people, 2,000 members. It's a lot, particularly on very little resources. Is there an element, David, where it needs to just work with 200 people or 300 people or whatever it happens to be?
I think it needs, certainly in terms of the leadership, we definitely don't need 20 board members. I think our view is probably a smaller board and then special advisors to advise on specific areas which might come up at one point. In terms of the membership, I certainly wouldn't not want people to be able to join, and if there were 10,000 members of the LCA, I'd be a very happy person. But I think it's coming up with a structure which, as you say, starts small, and then as we can possibly get funding and expand carefully, but certainly not to run before we can walk,
I think
would be my view.
with the structure, there was a lot of focus on making sure that it was representative and everyone had a voice. Every part of the country, the other countries of the UK, because otherwise it would end up very England focused. But also every part of the sector, every role has a representative, which is a good goal to strive for. But if it ends up with the board being unmanageable and dysfunctional, then
It's one of those no-win situations with that. Because if you don't, then people are going to feel left out. If you do, then it becomes so hard to keep moving.
Jess, sorry, I will come to you in a second, but Jess, from your point of view, does that have any, do you kind of agree? Do you think it can be all things to everybody who works within live comedy?
It'd be great if it was all things to everybody. We obviously strive for diversity and representation, and I think going forward, geographical representation will be really important. We were very reliant on our Welsh and Scottish allies, because we've been fed so many different roadmaps to reopening and deciphering that. And we were really conscious of making sure Wales wasn't left behind, or Scotland, because we were all moving at very different paces, and Northern Ireland of course. So I think that is definitely a priority going forward, but I do also believe there's always a diffusion of responsibility. The more people involved, the less gets done.
The big trick, and if you can pull it off, it will be really incredible, is getting your membership to understand that not everything will benefit them, but ultimately your overall objective is the betterance of the collective future of the comedy sector across the UK. Because we have this, increasingly realise at the Fringe Society that one size fits all actually doesn't fit anybody. So, but it's really challenging to get people to say that doesn't benefit me, and it's like it's not for you. If you can get your membership into that space, then that will help, because you can be really clear.
We were relying on a huge membership to do the surveys, to submit that data to DCMS. We needed that large engagement. So it'd be stupid now to go, let's engage with less of them, because that data is king. And then Save Live Comedy campaign, and we were relying on that membership to share that message. So in terms of who we represent as a membership, I don't think there should be any limit on that. Anyone who needs help should get it.
But maybe the organisation.
The organisation.
Not having 25 directors.
But I think it should be things like going on, like unis that do comedy degrees and stuff like that, getting it, implementing that, so that people who do comedy courses, not like when you finish a comedy course and go, here's a fund which you need to join, here's this. Because I know actors get it where they go, here's equity.
But it's a very weird industry, comedy. There's a lot of hobbyists, and then there's a lot of us who it's our career and pays our
Too many
bills.
hobbyists.
But there is just a lot of people who do it as a hobby, so we do need to prioritise the people whose livelihood it is and represent them first.
We should have a licence. Pass a certain amount of thing and get a licence to be a community.
So many laughs and then
I say we're going to finish at 3 o'clock, and it's now got 3 o'clock. So I reckon this debate will carry on for a long time after today. I think there'll almost certainly, for people who are watching it on Facebook, be quite a lot of comments on the Facebook page about it, which is great, and that would be really welcome. But I think it's been a really interesting conversation. I think we, for what it's worth, have established that there is a role for the LCA going forwards, and I guess it's a little bit of what space in terms of what's going to happen about the LCA. But I just want to thank you all. I want to apologise to you because you had a conversation, but we will all be here for a while yet, so we can still have, you don't have to go on Facebook and put your comments, you can actually talk to us and make your comments. But thank you very much to the panel for joining us today. I really appreciate it, and